Jy is ingeskakel op GROOTplaas en ons gas saam met ons vanoggend via Teams is Trevor Strydom. Hy's van Audacia Wines af en ons gesels 'n bietjie oor 'n baie unieke produk wat hulle op die mark gaan sit binnekort. Trevor, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Duppy. Thank you for having me on the program.
So let's start off with what makes Earth Essence different from traditional wines, beers and ciders?
Duppy, what we do in the actual recipe, we use the antioxidants from rooibos and honeybush plants to preserve the wine, beer and cider. So it's totally different. We don't use any chemicals in the process.
So you obviously are using and harvesting rooibos and honeybush to replace artificial preservatives. What is the process that this needs to go through and how much of this do you need to harvest?
Okay, so I don't actually harvest the rooibos or honeybush. I get the antioxidants are actually produced by Rooibos Limited and Afriplex, two big companies in South Africa. So the rooibos grows in the Clan William area, and the rooibos is already a big business. We export about 20,000 tons of rooibos a year. The honeybush industry is a lot smaller. That works out at about 400 tons a year. So I don't actually produce the rooibos and honeybush myself. I have got a wine farm on which I make the wines, and then Darling breweries make the beer and the cider for me. So what we actually do is we use antioxidants which are extracted from the plants. So we use minuscule amounts. We only use between 6 and 8 grams per hectoliter, per 100 liters, to preserve wine, beer and cider. And by doing that and not using something like sulfur dioxide in wine or sulfur dioxide in the cider, you get a totally different taste because there's no sulfur dioxide blanket in the products.
So can you maybe explain to us what is the difference exactly between the sulfur dioxide that used to be used and the new process that you're using?
Okay, so if you look at the wine industry, it's an 8,000-year-old industry. We've been making wine on this earth for about 8,000 years. I started in 2010, so it's been a 16-year journey to get to this point. Initially, I was trying to find an alternative flavor in wine, and I ended up finding something totally unique, and that is the magic in the rooibos and honeybush plants. So when wine is made, winemakers globally, the standard is to use sulfur dioxide as a preservative. So sulfur dioxide is added to wine to preserve it. As long as you have less than 10 parts per million, you don't have to have a health warning on wine which says contains sulfates. So in my process, what I discovered was that by using minuscule amounts of antioxidants, the antioxidants in the plant stop the wine oxidizing, so that preserves the wine. I was able to do away with the addition of sulfur dioxide into wine. And exactly the same process with cider, so we don't add any chemicals to preserve the cider. And then what I also discovered in beer, I could make fantastic beers by replacing the hops totally. But in South Africa, you have to add a small amount of hops to call it a beer. So at the end of the process, we add a tiny amount of hops to the beer so we can still call it a beer. But the antioxidant. Sorry?
In terms of shelf life, how much does this extend the shelf life of your wines?
Okay, so if you look at traditional wines, my wine will last exactly the same as any other wine that has had sulfur dioxide added. In terms of the beer and the ciders, I'm more than likely getting double the normal shelf life of a standard craft beer or standard craft ciders. So we've done extensive trials in that regard. So I'm very comfortable that the beer and the cider will last a lot longer than normal beers and ciders.
And then when we talk about the taste, which you mentioned, I think a lot of people have grown accustomed to what wines and beers and ciders taste like these days. How much do these rooibos and honeybush preservatives actually affect the taste?
One of the things, I've worked very closely with the technical committee of SARVIS and with the government officials, and in terms of wine specifically, the wine that I produce had to not in any way affect traditional wines. So just to explain that, a Merlot has to taste like a Merlot, a Shiraz has to taste like a Shiraz. And because we're adding such minuscule amounts of the antioxidants, it does not affect the taste of traditional wines. I'm not making tea and adding it to wine. I'm just using the antioxidants. So when you taste the wines are a lot softer. You don't have a sulfur blanket in the wines. They taste different. And when I say they taste different, in a traditional wine tasting environment, you cannot tell the difference. You do not pick anything up. So it doesn't affect the taste of traditional wines. When it comes to the cider, you're going to taste a lot more apple. And I think with all these things, until someone actually tastes the products, they have all these perceptions about it. And the only way to determine that is for people to actually taste the products.
Trevor, it's good to know that the smaak is still the smaak there. But we'll be back with you in a second. Trevor Strydom van Audacia Wines. Ons gesels 'n bietjie oor 'n preserveer proses wat hulle gebruik om hulle wyne 'n langer raaklewe te gee. Nou is tyd vir die Grootplaas kalender. Welkom terug op Grootplaas. Ons gas saam met ons vanoggend is Trevor Strydom van Audacia Wines. So Trevor, just before the break, we spoke about the new process that you are using with the artificial preservatives found in honeybush and rooibos. But this is quite interesting. Can these also help reduce sulfate-related headaches and irritations?
Okay, sorry, just before we start, the antioxidants that are extracted from rooibos and honeybush plants are not artificial preservatives. They are natural antioxidants. So just in that process, to keep it simple, wherever we would have added sulfur dioxide in the winemaking process, we're simply adding the antioxidants from rooibos and honeybush. It's as simple as that. When it comes to headaches, a lot of people ask me that question. I think people need to understand that headaches are normally caused because people drink too much alcohol. That is the main reason of a headache. But when you're actually drinking our products, you won't get a sulfur dioxide headache. You won't. Any of people that have certain allergic effects or by drinking products with sulfur dioxide in, it affects them. They won't get that effect because all our products have less than 10 parts per million. So they won't get that effect, and the only way to find out is to actually drink the products and see what the effect is.
When we look at the business, and this is relatively a new idea, when did this whole thing come to mind, and when did you actually decide this could be a real business?
The whole thing started in 2010, so it's been a 16-year journey of discovery. Initially, I was looking for an alternative wood in the winemaking process. In other words, not to use oak derivatives like chips and powders that we use in the winemaking process. So I started looking for flavor in the actual wine, and I ended up, through a process of discovery, finding out that the antioxidants in rooibos and honeybush plants could stop alcoholic beverages from oxidizing, from going off. So it started in 2010. I got the idea when my daughter gave me a cup of rooibos tea. And at that point in time, I thought maybe I could use the stem plants in the winemaking process. That's how the whole idea started.
And then whenever you're trying something new, obviously there are some challenges. Now, during your 14 years of development, what has been some of the biggest challenges?
The biggest challenge initially was when I started adding the rooibos chips, the wood chips initially, and I was adding the honeybush chips, it did flavor the wine. And at that point in time, I was about to give up, and I met the MD of Afriplex, and then he actually helped me by doing rooibos and honeybush antioxidants extractions. They've got a company called Afriplex, and we were able to produce a totally soluble extract that we used in doing trials in wine, and that is how we overcame the flavor problem that we were having in the wine. And once I could produce the antioxidant powder, which we use in the winemaking process, I was able to determine that we only needed 6 to 8 grams per hectoliter, and that in no way affects the flavor of wine.
So, Trevor, what's the future plans for the Earth Essence range?
The biggest problem in the wine industry is to get it out there, and in that instance, I've been very fortunate. Checkers have come on board. They like the products. They like all 3 of them. So they're allowing me to pilot test it in 25 liquor stores in and around Cape Town. I'm not in their DC. I deliver to those stores in my own farm, Bucky. It's quite a process. And if people like and taste and buy the products, they will then consider rolling it out nationally. So that's been my biggest break, is the support that I've had from Checkers liquor stores and Checkers themselves in actually trialing these products in their 25 liquor stores in the Western Cape.
Well, Trevor, thank you so much for speaking to us this morning, and we hope to see some of your wines down here in Gauteng as well. Dis Trevor Strydom van Audacia Wines, oor antioksidante wat hulle gebruik, natuurlike antioksidante van rooibos en ook van heuningbos. Ek moes nou eers bietjie my Engels daarso uit die pad uit kry, die airtime hardloop maar laag. Maar dis al waarvoor ons tyd het vir Grootplaas vir vanoggend. Ons hoop jy het dit saam met ons geniet, en dan kuier ons weer môreoggend saam.